The day that changed everything began with the sound of rushing water. Sarah Mitchell stood on her porch in Riverdale, Tennessee, watching in horror as the Cumberland River swallowed her world whole. Within hours, the home she had shared with her late husband and 3 children was gone. But sometimes, when life takes everything away, it sends an unexpected guardian. For Sarah, that guardian came in the form of Dex Harmon, a man who had long ago given up on humanity. A bounty hunter hardened by years of tracking down society's worst, he never imagined he would find redemption in the eyes of a widow and her children. This is the story of how one man's bitterness melted away when faced with a family's courage, and how sometimes the most unlikely heroes are born from the deepest tragedies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had been relentless for days. Sarah Mitchell glanced nervously at the old wooden clock on her kitchen wall as she prepared breakfast for her children. The weathered timepiece had belonged to her husband Jack, who had died 18 months earlier from a sudden heart attack at just 38 years old. The clock, like so many things in their modest farmhouse, was a constant reminder of him. "Mum, is the river going to flood?" 10-year-old Emma asked, her blue eyes so much like her father's, wide with concern as she sat at the kitchen table. "The news said we might need to evacuate," added 12-year-old Liam, her oldest, looking up from his cereal. Sarah forced a reassuring smile. "We're going to be just fine. This old house has weathered plenty of storms before." 6-year-old Mia, still in her pajamas decorated with cartoon unicorns, clutched her worn stuffed rabbit. "But Daddy always put the sandbags out when it rained this much." The innocent comment stabbed at Sarah's heart. Jack had always known what to do in emergencies. He had been their protector, their rock. Without him, Sarah was still learning to navigate crises on her own. "We're on higher ground than most folks," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. "But I've packed some bags just in case. Now finish your breakfast so you won't be late for school." The truth was, Sarah was worried. The forecast called for another 2 days of heavy rain, and the Cumberland River was already swollen beyond its banks in some areas. Their small farm sat a quarter-mile from the river, and while Jack had always assured her they were safe from flooding, this storm seemed different, more intense, more threatening. After dropping the children at school, Sarah stopped by Henderson's general store in town to pick up extra batteries and bottled water. The store was busier than usual, with locals stocking up on supplies. "Morning, Sarah," greeted Tom Henderson from behind the counter. His family had run the store for 3 generations in their small town of Riverdale. "Nasty weather we're having." "Morning, Tom. Any word on how bad it might get?" Tom shook his head grimly. "County's issued a flood warning. They're saying this could be the worst we've seen in 50 years. You might want to consider staying with your sister in Nashville for a few days." Sarah's sister Beth lived in the city, safely away from the river. But the thought of leaving their home, Jack's home, even temporarily, filled Sarah with dread. This was where they had built their life together, where all their memories lived. "I'll give her a call, but I think we'll be okay," Sarah replied, not entirely convinced. As she loaded supplies into her truck, the rain intensified, drumming against the metal roof like an ominous warning. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. 40 miles away in Nashville, Dex Harmon sat in his Spartan apartment, reviewing files on his latest target. At 45, Dex had spent the last 15 years as a bounty hunter, tracking down bail jumpers and fugitives across Tennessee and the neighboring states. The job suited his solitary nature and his deep-seated distrust of people. His apartment. Walls were bare except for a map of the state, marked with pins indicating current fugitives. No family photos, no mementos, nothing to suggest the place was a home rather than just somewhere to sleep between jobs. Dex's phone rang, interrupting his concentration. The caller ID showed it was Ray Blackwell, his contact at the bail bonds office. Harmon, Dex answered curtly. Got a new skip for you, Ray said without preamble. Dean Mercer jumped bail on armed robbery charges. Last seen heading toward Riverdale. Could be trying to leave the state via the back roads. Riverdale? Dex frowned. With all that flooding? Maybe he thinks the chaos will provide good cover. Files are in your email. Usual fee plus hazard pay considering the weather. I'll head out in an hour, Dex said, already planning his route. After the call ended, Dex opened his laptop to review Mercer's file. The man had a history of violence and was considered armed and dangerous. The bounty was substantial, enough to keep Dex comfortable for a few months. As he packed his gear, Dex listened to the local news reporting on the worsening flood conditions. Roads were being closed throughout Middle Tennessee, and evacuations had begun in several counties. Riverdale was mentioned specifically as being at high risk. Dex hesitated, considering whether to postpone the pursuit until after the storm. But experience had taught him that delays only made fugitives harder to catch. Besides, a little bad weather had never stopped him before. He holstered his Glock, grabbed his go-bag, and headed out to his black Dodge Ram. The truck was outfitted with heavy-duty tires and a winch, equipment that might prove useful in flood conditions. As he pulled out of Nashville, the rain came down in sheets, making visibility poor even with the wipers on high. The drive to Riverdale normally took less than an hour, but with the weather and road closures, Dex knew it would take significantly longer. He turned on the police scanner to monitor emergency broadcasts, listening for any mention of his target or new road closures. All residents within half a mile of the Cumberland River are urged to evacuate immediately, came a tense voice. Over the scanner. I repeat, this is not a drill. The dam cannot hold back the water much longer. Seek higher ground immediately. Dex grimaced. The situation was worse than he'd anticipated, but he pressed on, driven by the same single-minded determination that had made him one of the most successful bounty hunters in the state. By the time Sarah picked up her children from school, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. The school was closing early, and parents were arriving in a panic to collect their children. Mrs. Mitchell, the principal, Dr. Lawson, approached her as she gathered her kids. The county has issued a mandatory evacuation for your area. They're concerned about the Henderson Dam upstream. If it fails, everything along the river will be underwater within hours. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. We need to go home first, get our important papers, some clothes. There's no time, Dr. Lawson insisted. They're closing the bridge in 20 minutes. If you're not across by then, you'll be cut off. Sarah looked at her children's frightened faces and made a split-second decision. We'll be quick. Our house is on the way to the bridge anyway. Despite the principal's protests, Sarah hustled the children into her truck. The normally peaceful drive home had become treacherous, with water already covering portions of the road. When they finally reached their driveway, Sarah's heart sank. Water was seeping into their yard, already ankle-deep near the barn, where they kept a few chickens and their old horse, Thunder. Liam, help Emma and Mia pack one bag each, just essentials. I'll get Thunder and the chickens into the trailer. But, Mum, Liam began to protest. No arguments, Sarah cut him off, her voice firm despite her fear. 5 minutes, then we're leaving. As the children ran inside, Sarah waded through the rising water toward the barn. Thunder was nervously sensing the danger. The chickens fluttered about in panic as Sarah entered. She managed to coax Thunder into the small trailer attached to her truck and grabbed a crate for the chickens. Just as she was corralling the last bird, she heard Emma's scream from the house. Sarah abandoned the chicken and splashed through the now knee-deep water toward the house. Inside, she found water pouring in through the back door. The river's coming up fast, Emma cried, pointing out the window where their backyard had become a muddy lake. Grab your bags now, Sarah ordered, rushing to her bedroom to snatch the fireproof box containing their birth certificates, Jack's life insurance policy, and the deed to the house. She also grabbed the photo album from her bedside table and Jack's watch from its place of honor on the dresser. When she returned to the living room, the water was already seeping through the floorboards. Mia was crying, clutching her stuffed rabbit and a hastily packed backpack. Liam stood protectively beside his sisters, his own bag slung over his shoulder. "The road's disappearing, Mom," he said, his young voice steady, despite the fear in his eyes. Sarah ushered them outside to the truck, where the water had risen alarmingly in just the few minutes they'd been inside. She helped the children climb in, then ran back to the porch for one last look at the home she and Jack had built together. Water was now flowing freely through the lower level of the house. The family photos on the wall, the couch where they'd spent countless evenings together, Jack's recollection that she still couldn't bring herself to get rid of, all would be destroyed. A sob caught in her throat, but Sarah forced it down. There was no time for grief now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As she turned to leave, a framed photo of Jack caught her eye. Their wedding day, both of them laughing, unaware of the trials that lay ahead. On impulse, Sarah grabbed it and clutched it to her chest as she waded back to the truck. The engine sputtered when she turned the key, flooding with water. Sarah's heart pounded as she tried again, silently pleading with the old vehicle to start. "Please, please, please," she whispered, and on the third try, the engine roared to life. Sarah reversed quickly, the trailer with thunder swaying dangerously. As they pulled onto the main road, she could see other families fleeing, their vehicles loaded with whatever possessions they could salvage. The bridge that connected their side of Riverdale to the higher ground was just visible in the distance, but water was rapidly rising around it. Several emergency vehicles were stationed at the entrance, directing traffic. "We're going to make it," Sarah assured her children, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. They were less than a quarter-mile from the bridge when Sarah heard a deafening roar. Looking in her rearview mirror, she saw a wall of water surging toward them. The dam had failed. "Hold on!" she shouted, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The truck lurched forward, but the water was faster. It caught them just as they approached. The bridge, lifting the rear of the vehicle. Sarah fought to maintain control as they hydroplaned toward the guardrail. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Sarah's last thought before impact was of her children. Who would take care of them if something happened to her? Then the truck hit the rail, the metal crumpling with a sickening crunch. Water poured in through the windows as the vehicle teetered on the edge of the bridge. Behind them, the trailer had broken free, and Sarah caught a glimpse of thunder being swept away by the current. "Unbuckle your seatbelts," Sarah commanded, reaching back to help Mia with hers. "We have to get out." The driver's side door was jammed against the guardrail, so Sarah crawled across to the passenger side, pushing it open against the force of the water. She helped Emma out first, then Mia, instructing them to hold onto the rail. Liam climbed. At last, just as the truck shifted ominously, move along the rail toward the emergency workers. Sarah shouted over the roar of the water and the shouts of other stranded motorists. They inched along the guardrail, the water now up to Sarah's waist and Mia's chest. Sarah held Mia with one arm, while gripping the rail with the other. The cold water numbed her legs, making each step a struggle. Halfway across the bridge, a surge of water hit them, nearly sweeping Mia away. Sarah tightened her grip, but in doing so lost her hold on the rail. For a terrifying moment, they were both pulled toward the churning water below. Then Liam was there, his young arms surprisingly strong, as he grabbed his mother's jacket and yanked her back toward the rail. Emma helped, and together they prevented the catastrophe. "Just a little further," Sarah encouraged, her teeth chattering from cold and fear. As they neared the end of the bridge, emergency workers waded out to meet them. A firefighter took Mia from Sarah's arms, while another helped Emma. A third reached for Liam and Sarah, guiding them to safety. On solid ground, Sarah collapsed, pulling her children into a tight embrace. They were alive, but everything else was gone. Their home, their possessions, even thunder. All they had were the clothes on their backs and whatever they'd managed to stuff into their backpacks in those frantic few minutes. Mrs. Mitchell, a paramedic, approached, wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders. "We need to get you and your children checked out at the medical station." Sarah nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to a tent that had been set up in the parking lot of the Riverdale High School, now serving as an emergency shelter. Inside, volunteers distributed dry clothing, hot drinks, and food to shell-shocked evacuees. As a nurse checked Mia for injuries, Sarah stared out the tent opening. At the scene of devastation, the bridge they had just crossed was now completely submerged, the roofs of cars barely visible above the raging water. Beyond it, where their home had stood, was nothing but a vast, muddy lake. "Your children are fine, just cold and scared," the nurse informed her. "But you've got a nasty cut on your arm that needs stitches." Sarah looked down in surprise at her forearm, where a deep gash was bleeding steadily. She hadn't even felt it in the chaos of their escape. "The Red Cross has set up cots in the gymnasium," the nurse continued as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "There's a registration desk where you can list your family's names so relatives can find you." "My sister lives in Nashville," Sarah said, her voice distant even to her own ears. "I should call her." But when she reached for her phone, she realized it was gone, probably at the bottom of the river along with everything else. "You can use one of the emergency phones after we get you settled," the nurse assured her. Sarah nodded gratefully, then gathered her children close. "We're going to be okay," she promised them, somehow finding strength despite her own despair. "We have each other, and that's what matters most." As night fell, the Mitchell family settled onto cots in the crowded gymnasium. The children, exhausted by the day's trauma, fell asleep quickly, but Sarah lay awake, her mind racing with questions and fears about their future. Insurance would cover some of their losses, but the house had been old, and she'd let some policies lapse after Jack's death when money became tight. She had a small amount in savings, but nowhere near enough to start over, and her job at the local library wouldn't sustain them for long, especially if the building had been damaged in the flood. For the first time since Jack died, Sarah allowed herself to cry, silent tears streaming down her face as she contemplated the insurmountable challenges ahead. Everything they had built together was gone, washed away in a matter of hours. How would she provide for her children now? Where would they live? How would they rebuild? Sarah had no answers, only questions that circled endlessly in her mind as she finally drifted into a troubled sleep. Dex Harmon had almost reached Riverdale when news of the dam failure came over the scanner. He pulled to the side of the road, watching in disbelief as a massive surge of water flowed across the valley below. The pursuit of Dean Mercer would have to wait. No bounty was worth risking his life in what was clearly becoming a major disaster. Dex was about to turn back when he saw a convoy of emergency vehicles heading toward Riverdale. Something tugged at him, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to. Concern, responsibility, whatever it was, it compelled him to follow the emergency vehicles rather than retreat. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered to himself as he navigated around flooded sections of road. When he reached the Riverdale High School, now an impromptu evacuation center, Dex found himself automatically pulling into the parking lot. He sat in his truck for several minutes, watching the chaos of the relief effort, families being processed, children crying, volunteers distributing supplies. This wasn't his problem. He had no connection to these people, no obligation to help. His job was to find fugitives, not participate in disaster relief. And yet, he found himself getting out of his truck and approaching the command tent set up by emergency services. Perhaps Mercer would take advantage of the chaos to slip through. That's what Dex told himself anyway. "You with FEMA?" asked a harried-looking woman with a clipboard. "No," Dex replied. "I'm—" He hesitated, unsure how to explain his presence. "I've got a four-wheel drive vehicle and experience in rescue operations. Thought I could help." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to relief. "Thank God. We need all the help we can get. See that officer over there? Tell him Annie sent you. They're coordinating search and rescue for stranded residents." Dex nodded and made his way through the crowd. As he passed the gymnasium entrance, he glanced inside and froze. There, sitting on a cot with 3 children huddled around her, was a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Even from a distance, Dex could see the mixture of strength and desperation in her posture. Shoulders squared despite the weight clearly bearing down on her, something about her stopped him in his tracks. Perhaps it was the way she was comforting her children while obviously fighting back her own tears. Or maybe it was the stark contrast between her situation and his own solitary existence. For the first time in years, Dex felt a crack in the hard shell he'd built around himself. And as he watched the woman, whose name he didn't yet know, he had no idea that their paths were about to collide in ways that would change both their lives forever. Dawn broke over Riverdale High School with pale, watery light. The rain had finally stopped, but the devastation remained. Inside the gymnasium, Sarah Mitchell woke to the sounds of hundreds of displaced people stirring around her. Her body ached from the narrow cot and the previous day's ordeal. Liam was already awake, sitting protectively at the foot of his sister's cots. When he saw his mother stir, he moved to her side. "The Red Cross people are serving breakfast," he whispered, not wanting to wake Emma and Mia. "And Aunt Beth called. The emergency line. She's trying to get here, but a lot of roads are still closed." Sarah squeezed her son's hand, marveling at how quickly he'd stepped into the role of the man of the family. He was only 12, but at this moment he seemed much older. "Thank you, sweetheart. Let your sisters sleep a little longer. They need it." She rose stiffly, wincing at the pain in her arm where the nurse had stitched her wound. The makeshift shelter was already bustling with activity as volunteers distributed supplies and relief workers coordinated rescue efforts. Sarah made her way to a table where coffee was being served, gratefully accepting a steaming cup from an elderly volunteer. "You the Mitchell family?" the woman asked, consulting a clipboard. "From Riverbend Road?" Sarah nodded, surprised to be recognized. "Your property's on the assessment list for today. They're sending teams out to evaluate the damage now that the water's receding in some areas." Hope flickered briefly in Sarah's chest, but reality quickly extinguished it. Even if parts of their home remained standing, the damage would be catastrophic. Still, the possibility of recovering anything from their previous life made her heart race. "Is there any way I could go with them?" she asked. "There are things, important things, that might be salvageable." The volunteer frowned. "It's not protocol, Mom. Those areas are still dangerous, but—" She lowered her voice. "Check with the man in the black truck. He's been helping transport assessment teams. Big guy, kind of intimidating looking. Name's Harmon, I think." Sarah thanked her and returned to wake her daughters. After guiding them through a breakfast of donated pastries and fruit, she explained that she needed to speak with someone about checking on their home. "I want to come too," Liam insisted. "Not this time," Sarah said firmly. "I need you to stay with your sisters. Aunt Beth might arrive while I'm gone." Though clearly disappointed, Liam nodded. His sense of responsibility outweighed his curiosity. Sarah made her way to the parking lot, scanning for the black truck the volunteer had mentioned. She found it at the far end, an imposing Dodge Ram with mud-splattered sides and heavy-duty tires. Leaning against the hood was an equally imposing man. Dex Harmon was reviewing a map with a county emergency worker when he noticed the auburn-haired woman approaching. He recognized her immediately as the mother from the gymnasium. Up close, he could see the determination in her green eyes, despite the dark circles beneath them. "Excuse me," she said, her voice stronger than he expected. "I'm told you're helping with property assessments. I'm Sarah Mitchell. Our farm was on Riverbend Road." Dex studied her for a moment before responding. In his line of work, he'd become adept at reading people, and everything about this woman spoke of quiet resilience. "Dex Harmon," he replied, extending a calloused hand. "They're sending a team to that area in about an hour, but it's not safe for civilians." "I understand the risks," Sarah insisted, "but I need to see what's left. There are irreplaceable things. My husband's—" Her voice caught, and she took a breath before continuing. "He passed away last year. There are things of his I couldn't grab when we evacuated." The mention of a deceased husband explained the absence Dex had sensed. He was about to refuse her request when he noticed the small wedding band she still wore. Something about the gesture, her continued loyalty to a man no longer there, stirred something in him. "It's against protocol," he said gruffly. Then, after a pause, "But I'm not much for protocols. Be ready in an hour." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "Thank you. I can't, thank you." As she turned to leave, Dex called after her. "Mrs. Mitchell, it might be worse than you're expecting. The water hit that area hard." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I know, but I have to see it." After arranging for a volunteer to watch over her children, Sarah met Dex at his truck as promised. She had changed into donated clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, both slightly too large for her slender frame. The assessment team consisted of a structural engineer and a county official, both of whom looked dubiously at Sarah but didn't object to her presence after Dex vouched for her. The drive out of town revealed the full extent of the disaster. Roads were washed out, debris scattered everywhere. Houses that had stood for generations were reduced to piles of splintered wood and twisted metal. The familiar landscape had become alien, transformed by the force of the flood. As they approached Riverbend Road, Sarah leaned forward in her seat, straining to see ahead. Where the turn to her driveway should have been, there was only murky water and uprooted trees. "We'll have to go the back way," Dex said, carefully navigating around a section of collapsed roadway. "Through the Henderson property, if it's still accessible." The alternative route took them on a winding path through higher ground, eventually bringing them to a ridge overlooking what had once been Sarah's farm. The truck came to a stop, and for a long moment no one spoke. Below them, where the Mitchell family home had stood, was a scene of utter destruction. The house had been torn from its foundation, only partial walls of the first floor remaining. The barn was completely gone. Fields that had once grown corn and soybeans were now a murky lake. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry. She had prepared herself for damage, but not for this complete obliteration of her home. "I'm sorry," Dex said quietly, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. The structural engineer shook his head grimly. "There's nothing to assess. It's a total loss." The county official made notes on his clipboard. "We'll mark it for debris removal once the water recedes further. Insurance should—" "Can we get closer?" Sarah interrupted, her voice hollow. "Dex, assess the terrain. We can try. The truck can handle mud, but not deep water." They descended cautiously, the truck slipping occasionally on the muddy slope. As they drew nearer to what remained of the house, Sarah's composure began to crack. Her hands trembled in her lap. Dex parked as close as he dared, about 50 yards from the ruined structure. "Stay here," he instructed the assessment team. "I'll check if it's stable enough to approach." To Sarah, he said, "You too, Mrs. Mitchell. Let me make sure it's safe first." But Sarah was already opening her door. "It's my home," she said simply. Recognizing the futility of arguing, Dex nodded. "Stay behind me. Step exactly where I step." Together, they picked their way through the muddy wasteland that had once been a front yard. Family possessions were strewn about, a waterlogged sofa cushion, a child's bicycle bent beyond repair, a kitchen chair impaled on a broken fence post. Each item they passed seemed to wound Sarah anew, but she pressed on, her jaw set determinedly. When they reached what remained of the front porch, Dex held out an arm to stop her. "The structure isn't stable," he warned, eyeing the precariously leaning walls. "Tell me what you're looking for. I'll see if I can find it." Sarah hesitated, then pointed toward where the back of the house would have been. "My husband's study was there. There was a wooden chest about this big." She indicated with her hands. "It has his military medals, letters, our wedding album." Dex nodded, understanding the importance of these items. "Wait here. I mean it this time." Sarah watched anxiously as Dex carefully navigated the ruins of her home. Years of tracking fugitives through difficult terrain had made him sure-footed, but even he struggled with the unstable flooring and debris. The back portion of the house had suffered less damage than the front, though it was still a scene of destruction. Dex scanned what must have been the study. Bookcases toppled, papers and books swollen with water, a desk overturned. In the corner, partially covered by a fallen section of drywall, he spotted a wooden chest that matched Sarah's description. Moving cautiously, he cleared away the debris and examined the chest. It was solidly built, the lid secured with a brass latch that had kept it closed despite the flood. As Dex lifted it, testing its weight, a sound like cracking timber came from above. He looked up to see a section of ceiling beginning to give way. In an instant, he tucked the chest under one arm and dove toward the doorway, narrowly escaping as beams and insulation crashed down where he had stood seconds before. From her position, on the lawn, Sarah cried out in alarm. But moments later, Dex emerged from the dust, the wooden chest clutched protectively against his chest. "Got it," he called, picking his way back to her. "Anything else?" Sarah stared at the chest in disbelief, then up at the man who had risked himself to retrieve it. "No," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "No, this is enough. Thank you." As they returned to the truck, Sarah cradling the chest like a precious child, the assessment team watched with a mixture of surprise and respect. Few had seen Dex Harmon, notorious loner and hardened bounty hunter, perform such an act of compassion. Back at the high school, Dex helped Sarah carry the chest to a quiet corner of the gymnasium. Her children rushed to meet her, eager for news of their home. "Is Thunder okay?" Mia asked immediately. "Did you find him?" Sarah knelt to her youngest, daughter's level. "No, sweetheart, I couldn't find Thunder, but look what Mr. Harmon saved for us." She opened the chest, revealing its contents largely protected from the water. Jack Mitchell's military medals gleamed dully in their cases. Photo albums, while damp at the edges, had survived. Letters, sealed in plastic bags, were intact. "Dad's things," Liam breathed, reaching out to touch a medal with reverent fingers. Dex stood awkwardly to the side, uncomfortable with the family's emotional moment. He was about to slip away when Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Did you save these for us?" the 10-year-old asked, blue eyes wide. Dex cleared his throat. "Your mom told me where to look." "Are you a superhero?" Mia wanted to know, gazing up at him with genuine curiosity. A startled laugh escaped Dex, the first genuine laugh in longer than he could remember. "No, kid, not even close." Sarah rose, wiping away tears. "Mr. Harmon is a bounty hunter," she explained to her children. "He finds people who don't want to be found." "Like hide and seek?" Mia pressed. "Something like that," Dex replied, unexpectedly. Charmed by the child's innocent perspective, a commotion at the gymnasium entrance drew their attention. A woman who bore a striking resemblance to Sarah was scanning the room anxiously. "Aunt Beth!" the children cried in unison, rushing toward. Beth Mitchell gathered her nieces and nephew in a tight embrace before spotting her sister. The relief on her face was palpable as she hurried over, arms outstretched. "Sarah, thank God you're all right. I've been trying to get here since yesterday." The sisters clung to each other, both fighting tears. When they separated, Beth noticed. "Dex, who's this?" "Dex Harmon," Sarah said, her voice warm with gratitude. "He saved Jack's chest from the house." Beth's eyebrows rose slightly as she assessed the rough-looking man. "Then I owe you my thanks, Mr. Harmon. Those memories mean the world to this family." Dex nodded uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "You're a professional treasure hunter?" Beth asked skeptically. "He's a bounty hunter," Emma informed her aunt proudly. "He finds bad guys." Beth's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of concern crossing her features. Sarah noticed and quickly changed the subject. "Beth's come to take us to Nashville. She explained to Dex. "We'll stay with her until we figure out what's next." "You have room for 4?" Dex asked Beth, surprising himself with his concern. "We'll make it work," Beth assured him. "It's a 2-bedroom apartment, but the kids can bunk in the living room." Dex nodded, oddly relieved to know the Mitchell family had somewhere to go. He should have been returning to his pursuit of Dean Mercer, but somehow the fugitive seemed less important now. "I should get back," he said awkwardly. "There are more assessment runs to make." Sarah stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Harmon, I don't know how to thank you." Dex took her hand, surprised by the strength in her grip. "No thanks necessary, Mrs. Mitchell." "Sarah," she corrected gently, "and there is. You didn't have to help us, but you did." Something in her direct gaze made Dex uncomfortable, not in an unpleasant way, but in a manner he wasn't accustomed to. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him with anything other than fear or suspicion. "Take care of your family," he said gruffly, releasing her hand. "And good luck." With a nod to the children and Beth, he turned and strode out of the gymnasium, trying to ignore the odd sensation in his chest, a feeling of connection he hadn't experienced in years. The next few days passed in a blur for Dex. He continued, helping with rescue and assessment operations, telling himself it was only because the conditions made tracking Mercer impossible. But in truth, the bounty had become secondary to the unexpected sense of purpose he found in the relief efforts. He found himself watching for the Mitchell family whenever he returned to the high school, but they had departed for Nashville as planned. Their absence left an unexplainable void that Dex tried to ignore. On the 4th day after the flood, as Dex was loading supplies into his truck, the county sheriff approached him. "Harmon," Sheriff Dalton greeted him. "Got a minute?" Dex and the sheriff had a complicated history. As a bounty hunter, Dex sometimes operated in gray areas that law enforcement found problematic. But the disaster had temporarily erased such tensions. "What's up, Dalton? Got word about your skip, Dean Mercer." The sheriff handed Dex a printout. "Highway patrol spotted him outside Chattanooga yesterday. Thought you'd want to know." Dex scanned. The report. Mercer was no longer in the flood zone, having apparently used the chaos to make his escape south. "Thanks," Dex said, folding the paper and tucking it into his jacket. "I'll head out tomorrow." Sheriff Dalton nodded. "You've done good work here, Harmon. Wouldn't have pegged you for the humanitarian type." "Don't get used to it," Dex replied. Dryly, but as the sheriff walked away, Dex remained standing beside his truck, deeply conflicted. The trail on Mercer was fresh and the bounty substantial. Logic dictated he should leave immediately, yet something held him back, something he couldn't quite identify. The image of Sarah Mitchell and her children kept surfacing in his mind. Their resilience in the face of complete loss had affected him in ways he hadn't anticipated. That evening, as Dex sat in his truck reviewing his maps for the journey to Chattanooga, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Harmon," he answered. "Cautiously, Mr. Harmon, it's Sarah Mitchell." Her voice was as clear and determined as he remembered, though tinged with uncertainty. Dex sat up straighter, surprised. "Mrs. Mitchell, how did you get this number?" "Sheriff Dalton gave it to me when I called the relief center. I hope that's okay." It's fine, Dex assured her, inexplicably pleased to hear from her. Are you and the kids settled in Nashville? As settled as we can be under the circumstances, she paused. The reason I'm calling, I found something when we were going through Jack's chest, something I think might interest you professionally. Dex frowned. Professionally. There was a letter from Jack's time in the military. He served with a man named Dean Mercer. They weren't close, but Jack mentioned him in his correspondence home. The name sent a jolt through Dex. Dean Mercer? You're sure? Positive. And there's more. The letter mentioned Mercer had family in Chattanooga, a sister. I think Jack was helping him write letters to her. Dex's mind raced. This information could be invaluable in tracking his target. But more than that, the coincidence was startling. Of all the fugitives he could have been pursuing, it was one connected to Sarah's late husband. That's helpful, Dex admitted. Thank you for letting me know. There's one more thing, Sarah continued, her voice softening. The kids have been asking about you, especially Mia. She's decided you're her hero for saving her dad's things. Dex felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through him. I'm no hero. Maybe not, Sarah replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. But you did something heroic for us, and I never properly thanked you. You did, Dex reminded her. A handshake. And a few words don't seem adequate for what you risked. She took a breath. We're staying at my sister's apartment in Nashville. If you're passing through, well, I make a decent pot of coffee, and the kids would love to see you. The invitation caught Dex off guard. People in his line of work didn't receive social invitations, especially not from respectable widows with young children. I'm actually heading to Chattanooga tomorrow, he found himself saying. Nashville's on the way. Then stop by, Sarah encouraged. Just for coffee, no pressure. After getting the address, Dex ended the call and sat staring at his phone. The sensible course of action was to focus on tracking Mercer. Distractions could cost him the bounty. And yet, the prospect of seeing Sarah and her children again filled him with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The realization was both alarming and strangely exhilarating. As night fell over the flood-ravaged town, Dex made a decision. He will stop in Nashville tomorrow, just for coffee, just to get more information about Mercer's sister. But deep down, he knew his reasons went beyond professional interest. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Dex Harmon was allowing himself to form a connection, to step beyond the solitary existence he had built for himself, and though he would never have admitted it, the prospect both terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Standing at the edge of the high school parking lot, Dex looked out over the devastated town. Amid all this destruction, something unexpected had happened. A small crack had formed in the wall he'd built around his heart, a crack that threatened to widen with each thought of Sarah Mitchell and her resilient children. Beth Mitchell's two-bedroom apartment in Nashville's East End district was modest, but comfortable. Located on the third floor of a converted warehouse, it featured exposed brick walls, large windows, and just enough space for a single woman who spent most of her time at the marketing firm where she worked. But with the addition of her sister and 3 children, the apartment had become crowded. Liam and the girls were camped out in the living room, their borrowed sleeping bags arranged around a coffee table that now served as both dining surface and homework station. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the morning traffic below, while nursing a cup of coffee. Behind her, Mia and Emma bickered good-naturedly over the last strawberry Pop-Tart. You can split it, Sarah suggested without turning around. The girls grumbled but complied, carefully breaking the pastry into equal halves. Liam emerged from the bathroom, his hair damp from the shower. At 12, he was at that awkward age where childhood and adolescence overlapped, made more complicated by the circumstances thrusting adult responsibilities upon him. "Did you call the insurance company again?" he asked his mother, reaching for the cereal box. Sarah nodded. They're sending an adjuster out next week to look at the property, but it's going to be a while before we see any money. They're overwhelmed with claims. The reality of their situation weighed heavily on Sarah. The family had been in Nashville for 3 days, and while Beth was gracious about sharing her space, the arrangement couldn't last. Sarah needed to find work, a place to live, and schools for the children, all while processing the trauma of losing their home and possessions. "Is Mr. Harmon still coming today?" Emma asked, wiping strawberry filling from her lips. Sarah glanced at the clock on the microwave. "He said he might stop by on his way through town, but he's working, sweetheart. Don't get your hopes up." Despite her cautionary words, Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing Dex again. There was something about the gruff bounty hunter that intrigued her, a depth beneath his hardened exterior that she'd glimpsed when he risked himself to save Jack's chest. "I made him a thank you card," Mia announced, holding up a colorful construction paper creation adorned with glitter glue and markers. "Miss Carroll at the shelter gave me the supplies." Sarah smiled, examining her daughter's artwork. "It's beautiful, honey. I'm sure he'll love it." "Do bounty hunters like glitter?" Liam asked skeptically, earning him a glare from his youngest sister. "Everyone likes glitter," Mia insisted, with the absolute conviction of a 6-year-old. The buzzer from the building's entrance interrupted their breakfast routine. Beth, already dressed for work in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, answered the intercom. "Yes? Oh, yes, come on up. 3rd floor, apartment 312. She turned to Sarah with raised eyebrows. "Your bounty hunter is here." "He's not my bounty hunter," Sarah corrected, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She was wearing borrowed jeans and one of Beth's old university sweatshirts, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She hadn't expected Dex to arrive so early. Mia rushed to the door, card in hand, waiting impatiently for their visitor. When a knock finally came, she yanked the door open before anyone could stop her. Dex Harmon stood in the hallway, looking somewhat out of place in his rugged clothing and well-worn leather jacket. He held a small cardboard box in one hand and a paper bag in the other. At the sight of Mia beaming up at him, his stern expression softened slightly. "Mr. Harmon," the little girl exclaimed, "I made you this." She thrust the glitter-covered card toward him. Dex carefully balanced his items to accept the card. "Thank you," he said, examining the artwork with appropriate seriousness. "It's very sparkly." "I told Liam you'd like glitter," Mia declared, triumphantly. Sarah appeared behind her daughter, a smile playing at her lips. "Good morning, Mr. Harmon. Please come in. Don't mind the chaos." Dex stepped into the apartment, taking in the cramped quarters and makeshift sleeping arrangements. With a quick glance, the Mitchell children watched him with varying degrees of curiosity, while Beth observed from the kitchen, clearly evaluating this unusual visitor. "I brought donuts," Dex said, holding up the paper bag. "And this." He extended the box to Sarah. "Found it downstream from your property. Thought it might be yours." Sarah took the box with a questioning look and opened it. Inside was a framed photograph, the glass cracked but the image still visible. Sarah and Jack on their wedding day. The same photo she had impulsively grabbed before fleeing their flooding home, only to lose it in the chaos of their escape from the bridge. "How did you—" she began, her voice catching. "County cleanup crew found it about a mile downstream. I recognized you both." Dex shifted uncomfortably under the intensity of her gaze. "The frame's damaged, but the picture's okay." Sarah traced a finger over the cracked glass, over Jack's smiling face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought it was gone forever." Beth cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "I'm Beth Mitchell, Sarah's sister. We didn't properly meet at the shelter." She extended a hand, which Dex shook. "Thank you for what you did for my family. Just happened to be in the right place," Dex replied modestly. "Well, I wish I could stay for donuts, but I'm already late for work." Beth gathered her purse and keys. "Sarah, don't forget your appointment with the FEMA representative at 2. And kids, be good for your mom." She gave her sister a meaningful look before departing. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harmon." After Beth left, an awkward silence fell over the apartment. Dex remained standing near the door, clearly uncertain about his place in this domestic setting. "Coffee?" Sarah offered, placing the wedding photo carefully on a shelf. "And please, call me Sarah." "Dex," he replied with a nod. And yes, coffee would be good. As Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, Emma approached Dex cautiously. "Are you still hunting bad guys?" she asked. Dex nodded. "That's my job." "Is that why you have a gun?" The girl continued, pointing to the subtle bulge under his jacket. "Emma!" Sarah called from the kitchen, mortified. "It's okay," Dex assured her. To Emma, he said, "Yes, that's part of the reason. But I only use it when absolutely necessary. It's a tool, not a toy." "Mom says guns are dangerous," Liam chimed in, curious despite his attempt to appear unimpressed by their visitor. "Your mom's right," Dex agreed. "They're very dangerous in the wrong hands. That's why I have extensive training and proper licenses." Sarah returned with 2 mugs of coffee, impressed by Dex's patient handling of her children's questions. "All right, enough interrogation. Mr. Haar, Dex is our guest, not a suspect. But we want to know about the bad guy he's chasing." Mia protested, climbing onto the couch. "Is he scary?" Dex accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "The man I'm looking for broke the law, but most people who do that aren't movie villains. They're regular people who made bad choices." Sarah was struck by the unexpectedly nuanced response. Most people in Dex's profession, she imagined, would paint their targets as irredeemable criminals. His perspective suggested a deeper understanding of human nature than his gruff exterior implied. "Do you have information about his sister?" Dex asked, steering the conversation away from the children's questions. Sarah nodded. "Let me get Jack's letter." While she retrieved the chest from the bedroom, Liam convinced his sisters to enjoy their donuts at the coffee table, giving the adults some space to talk. Sarah returned with a worn envelope and sat beside Dex at the small dining table. "Jack served with Mercer in Afghanistan," she explained, removing a handwritten letter from the envelope. "They weren't close, friends, but they were in the same unit for a few months in 2013. Dex listened intently as Sarah pointed out the relevant passages in her late husband's letter. Jack Mitchell had mentioned helping Mercer write to his sister in Chattanooga, a woman named Elaine Mercer Davies, who operated a small bookstore. "This is incredibly helpful," Dex said, making notes on his phone. "Most skips run to the family eventually, especially when they're desperate." "What will happen to him when you find him?" Sarah asked quietly. Dex looked up from his notes, sensing her concern. "He'll go back to jail to await trial. After that, it depends on the judge and the evidence." He hesitated, then added, "I don't decide their fates, Sarah. I just bring them back to face the consequences of their actions." The sincerity in his voice reassured her. "I know. Jack always believed in second chances. He said war taught him how thin the line is between right and wrong sometimes." Dex nodded thoughtfully. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Sarah agreed, a small smile touching her lips at the memory. "Not perfect, but good. Honorable." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sounds of the children chatting over their donuts. Dex found himself studying Sarah's profile, the determined set of her jaw, the quiet strength evident in her posture despite all she'd endured. "How are you really doing?" he asked suddenly. With all of this, the question caught Sarah off guard. Most people asked how the children were coping, assuming her own needs came second. The directness of Dex's concern momentarily cracked her carefully maintained composure. She began, then shook her head. Honestly, I'm terrified. The insurance will only cover a fraction of what we lost. I have no job, no home, and 3 children depending on me. Beth is wonderful, but we can't stay here indefinitely. Dex listened without interrupting, giving her the rare gift of his full attention. I keep telling the kids everything will be okay, Sarah continued, her voice lower now, but I'm not sure how to make that true. After Jack died, I thought we'd face the worst life could throw at us. I was wrong. She looked up, embarrassed by her candor. I'm sorry. You didn't come here for my problems. Don't apologize, Dex said simply. You're one of the strongest people I've met, Sarah Mitchell. Most would have crumbled under half of what you're carrying. The unexpected compliment brought warmth to Sarah's cheeks. I don't feel strong. That's usually how it works, Dex replied with the hint of a smile. The strongest people rarely recognize their own strength. From the living room, Mia called out, Mom, Liam won't let me have the last donut even though he already had 2. Sarah sighed, the moment broken. Duty calls. As she mediated the donut dispute, Dex found himself observing the family interaction with an unfamiliar longing. There was something genuinely appealing about the chaos of the Mitchell household, the bickering, the laughter, the unquestioning, love that bound them together despite their circumstances. His own childhood had been devoid of such warmth. Raised by a father whose grief over his mother's death had hardened into bitterness, Dex had learned early to rely only on himself. His adult life had continued that pattern, with relationships brief and superficial. Yet here was Sarah, widowed and homeless, still creating security and love for her children amid devastating loss. It challenged something fundamental in Dex's worldview. When Sarah returned to the table, Dex had made a decision. I should get on the road if I want to reach Chattanooga by afternoon, Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment at his imminent departure. Of course, thank you for stopping by and for the photo. You have no idea what that means to me. It was nothing, Dex insisted, rising from his chair. To his surprise, the Mitchell children gathered around him. Are you leaving already? Emma asked, pouting slightly. Will you come back? Mia added, tugging at his jacket. Even Liam looked disappointed. You didn't tell us any bounty hunter stories. Dex found himself at a loss for words. In his nomadic existence, people rarely asked him to stay, let alone return. Mr. Harmon has work to do, Sarah explained to her children. But maybe he'll visit us again someday, if his travels bring him back to Nashville. Actually, Dex said, the words emerging before he could overthink them, I have a property outside Nashville. A cabin my grandfather left me. I don't use it. Much, but it's furnished. Basic but livable, with 3 bedrooms, well water, some land around it. Sarah stared at him, uncomprehending. That's nice? What I mean is, Dex continued, unusually uncertain, you and the kids could stay there. Until you get back on your feet. No rent, he added hastily. It's just sitting empty most of the time anyway. The offer hung in the air between them. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. That's incredibly generous, she finally managed. But we couldn't possibly. Why not? Dex challenged. It makes sense. You need a place to stay that's not your sister's crowded apartment. I have a place sitting empty. Simple logistics. He presented it as a practical arrangement, but they both recognized it was far more significant than that. It was a gesture of trust, of connection, foreign territory for a man who had spent his adult life keeping others at arm's length. I'd need to see it first, Sarah said cautiously. Make sure it's suitable for the children. Of course, it's about 40 minutes outside the city, rural but not too isolated. Dex pulled a set of keys from his pocket and separated one from the ring. The address is on the tag. Check it out while I'm in Chattanooga. If it works for you, it's yours for as long as you need it. Sarah accepted the key, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Why are you doing this, Dex?" The question was direct, her gaze searching. Dex considered deflecting but found himself answering. "Honestly, because someone did it for me once, when I was a kid after my mom died. A neighbor took us in for a while when my dad was struggling. It was more personal information than he'd shared with anyone in years. Sometimes people need a bridge to get from one place in life to another." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance of what he was offering. "Thank you. We'll take good care of it." "I know you will." Dex turned to the children. "Be good for your mom. Maybe when I get back, I'll tell you some of the less dangerous bounty hunter stories." Mia beamed. "Promise?" "Promise," Dex replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. As Sarah walked him to the door, he added quietly, "There's a shed on the property with some tools. Basic stuff, but enough to make repairs if needed. Help yourself to whatever's there." "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said as they reached the door. "You already did," Dex replied simply, "by trusting me with your husband's letter. That information will help me find Mercer." With a final nod to Sarah and a wave to the children, Dex departed, his steps lighter than when he'd arrived. As he descended the apartment building stairs, he recognized the unfamiliar sensation in his chest, hope mixed with a touch of apprehension. For the first time in decades, Dex Harmon had allowed himself to form a connection. He had offered a piece of himself, his grandfather's cabin, a place he had intentionally kept separate from his turbulent life as a bounty hunter. A sanctuary of sorts, now extended to Sarah and her children. The implications should have terrified him. Instead, as he climbed into his truck and programmed the Chattanooga address into his GPS, Dex felt oddly at peace with his decision. Whether it was wisdom or folly remained to be seen, but the die was cast. As he pulled away from the curb, Dex glanced in his rearview mirror. Sarah stood at the apartment window, watching him leave. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Dex felt the weight of their unspoken understanding. They were two wounded souls, each carrying their own burdens, yet somehow finding strength in an unexpected connection. With a final nod, he turned his attention to the road ahead. Chattanooga awaited, and with it, Dean Mercer. The familiar rhythm of the hunt beckoned, but for the first time in years, Dex found himself equally focused on what and who awaited his return. The bookstore was tucked between a laundromat and a small cafe on a quiet street in downtown Chattanooga. Davies Books and Brew read the hand-painted sign, with Esther 2015 in smaller letters beneath. Through the window, Dex could see shelves of books and a small counter where coffee was served. After 3 hours of surveillance, he had yet to spot Dean Mercer. The store was operated by a woman in her 30s who matched the description of Elaine Mercer Davies. She moved efficiently between customers, recommending titles and preparing coffee with practiced ease. Dex remained in his truck, parked across the street, with a clear view of both the store's entrance and the alley that led to its back door. Patience was essential in his line of work. Fugitives made mistakes when they felt safe, when they believed the pursuit had cooled. As afternoon faded into evening, the bookstore's customer traffic dwindled. Dex was considering a more direct approach when a delivery van pulled into the alley. Instead of a uniformed driver, a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses emerged, glancing nervously up and down the street before gathering several boxes from the van's interior. Even at a distance, Dex recognized Dean Mercer from his mugshot. The fugitive had grown a beard and lost weight, but his movements, the particular way he hunched his shoulders, were unmistakable. Dex reached for his phone, considering his options. Standard procedure would be to call local law enforcement for backup, but something made him hesitate. Sarah's words about her husband's belief in second chances, perhaps. Or maybe his own growing weariness with the endless cycle of capture and incarceration that defined his profession. Through his zoom lens, Dex watched as Elaine greeted her brother at the back door. She looked tired, but relieved to see him, accepting the boxes, likely supplies for the store, with a grateful smile. Their brief interaction spoke of a genuine familial bond, not the reluctant harboring of a dangerous criminal. Dex set down the camera and drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, weighing his next move carefully. He had found his target, as he always did. But for the first time in his career, capturing the fugitive didn't feel like the unequivocal victory it usually did. As twilight settled over Chattanooga, Dex Harmon faced an unprecedented dilemma. The path forward, once so clear, had become complicated by his evolving perspective, a perspective undeniably influenced by his encounter with Sarah Mitchell and her resilient family. Night had fallen over Chattanooga as Dex continued his surveillance. Of Davy's Books and Brew, the lights inside dimmed as Elaine closed up shop, flipping the sign on the door to closed and beginning her end-of-day routine. Her brother, Dean Mercer, had disappeared into the back room and hadn't emerged. Dex's phone vibrated with an incoming text. He glanced down to see Sarah's name on the screen, a small jolt of surprise passing through him. He'd given her his number, for emergencies, not expecting her to use it so soon. "We visited the cabin today. It's perfect. The kids are already fighting over bedrooms. Are you sure about this?" A second text followed immediately. "Sorry to bother you while you're working." Dex found himself smiling slightly at the apology. In his world, text messages typically meant trouble. A bail bondsman with a new assignment, a tip about a fugitive, or a complication with a capture. "Not bothering me," he typed back. "Glad it works for you. I'm sure." As he sent the reply, movement at the bookstore caught his attention. Elaine was exiting through the front door, locking up behind her. She wore a coat now and carried a large purse, but there was no sign of her brother. Dex frowned, scanning the building carefully. The back door remained closed, no lights visible. Through the rear windows, had Mercer slipped out somehow, or was he staying in the store overnight? His phone vibrated again. "The children want to know if you caught the bad guy yet." The question landed like a stone in Dex's stomach. For decades, his world had been clearly defined. Bail jumpers were targets to be apprehended, contracts to be fulfilled. But Sarah's question, innocently relaying her children's curiosity, complicated matters, especially after what he'd witnessed. Between Mercer and his sister. "Not yet," he responded simply. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "How are the kids settling in?" The inquiry felt foreign to him. Small talk wasn't his forte, yet he found himself genuinely interested in the answer. As he waited for her response, Dex turned his attention back to the bookstore. Elaine had walked to a small blue sedan parked down the street and was now driving away. Dex briefly considered following her, suspecting she might lead him to Mercer if he wasn't staying at the store. But something held him back. His phone lit. Up with Sarah's reply. They're excited about the space after being cooped up in Beth's apartment. Mia loves the porch swing. Liam is inspecting every inch of the shed tools like he knows what he's looking at. Emma found a bird's nest in the oak tree and is researching what kind of bird it belongs to. It feels good to see them acting like kids again. The message painted a vivid picture, one that tugged at something long dormant in Dex. His grandfather's cabin had stood largely empty since the old man's passing 15 years ago. Dex maintained it and occasionally used it as a retreat between jobs, but it had never felt like home, just another property, another asset. The thought of it filled with children's voices, with life and purpose, stirred mixed emotions. Satisfaction that the space was being used as his grandfather would have wanted, but also a strange sense of longing for something he'd never really had, a normal family life. "The property has good bones," he texted back. Grandfather built it to last. Just as he sent the message, a light flickered on in the back room of the bookstore. Through the window, Dex could make out a shadowy figure moving around. Mercer had remained inside after all. This was his moment. The fugitive was contained, likely preparing to bed down for the night. Protocol dictated that Dex call local law enforcement for backup, then move in to make the capture while Mercer was cornered. Yet he hesitated, his finger hovering over the phone's screen. The conversation with Sarah had disrupted his focus, introducing unwelcome complexity into what should have been a straightforward apprehension. With a frustrated sigh, Dex set his phone aside and reached for his binoculars. Through them, he observed Mercer making up what appeared to be a cot in the back room of the store. The man moved with the caution of someone accustomed to looking over his shoulder, checking the locks on the door repeatedly before settling down. Another text from Sarah arrived. Mia wants to know if your cabin has ghosts. Apparently, the creaking is suspicious. Despite the tension of the moment, Dex felt his lips quirk upward. Tell her it's just an old house talking to itself. No ghosts, I checked personally. The exchange felt surreal, discussing childish concerns about ghosts while conducting surveillance on a wanted fugitive. These two worlds were never meant to intersect, yet here they were, colliding in the most unexpected way. Dex made a decision. He would wait until morning to approach Mercer. The fugitive wasn't going anywhere tonight, and Dex wanted a clearer picture of the situation before making his move. There was more to this story than the bail-jumping charge suggested, and Sarah's connection to it, however tangential through her late husband, warranted further investigation. Going to be late at night, he texted Sarah. We'll check in tomorrow. Her response came quickly. Be safe, and thank you again for the cabin. It already feels more like home than Beth's apartment did. Home. The word lingered in Dex's mind as he settled in for a long night of surveillance. It had been decades since any place had truly felt like home to him. The concept itself seemed foreign, a luxury afforded to others, but not to someone in his line of work. Yet Sarah and her children had already begun transforming his grandfather's cabin into a home within hours of arriving. The thought was both comforting and disquieting. As the night deepened, Dex's thoughts drifted between his current assignment and the unexpected turn his life had taken since meeting the Mitchell family. For the first time in years, his focus was divided, his professional instincts at odds with newly awakened emotions he couldn't quite name. Morning sunlight spilled through the cabin windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah sat at the old wooden table in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and watching as her children explored their new temporary home with growing excitement. The cabin was rustic but solid, just as Dex had described. 3 bedrooms, a spacious living area with a stone fireplace, a simple kitchen with dated but functional appliances, and a wide covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the structure. The furnishings were minimal, mostly items that appeared to have belonged to Dex's grandfather, but comfortable. What struck Sarah most was the sense of peace that permeated the property. Set back from the main road and surrounded by mature trees, the cabin offered a privacy and quietude that felt healing after the chaos of the flood and the cramped quarters of Beth's apartment. "Mom!" Emma called from outside. "Come see what I'm found in the garden." Sarah set down her coffee and stepped onto the porch. Behind the cabin, a fenced area contained what had once been a vegetable garden, now overgrown but still showing signs of former organization. Emma stood beside a weathered wooden structure. "It's a beehive box," her daughter explained excitedly, "but there aren't any bees anymore. Could we maybe get bees? My science teacher says they're important for the environment." Sarah smiled at Emma's enthusiasm. "Let's settle in first before we start raising bees, honey. But we could grow vegetables again," Emma persisted. "And flowers for the bees? It would help save money on groceries." The practicality touched Sarah. At 10 years old, Emma was already thinking about family finances, aware of their precarious situation, even as she found joy in their new surroundings. "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah agreed. "We'll make a garden, plan together." Nearby, Liam was examining the shed that Dex had mentioned. It was larger than Sarah had expected, almost a small barn, filled with neatly organized tools hanging from pegboards. A workbench ran along one wall, and shelves held cans of paint, coils of rope, and various building materials. "Mom, look at this!" Liam called, pointing to a corner where several fishing rods stood propped against the wall. "Do you think Mr. Harmon would mind if I tried fishing in that pond we saw down the path?" "I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but let's ask him when he gets back," Sarah replied, touched by her son's consideration. Despite his eagerness, Liam was careful to respect boundaries, a maturity beyond his years that made Sarah both proud and a little sad. Children his age shouldn't have to be so mindful of others' property, so aware of their place as guests in someone else's space. Mia emerged from the cabin, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mom, I picked the smallest bedroom because it has a window seat where Hoppy and I can read." "That's very thoughtful of you," Sarah said, kneeling to her daughter's level. "Your brother and sister will appreciate having the larger rooms. Mr. Harmon's grandfather must have been nice," Mia declared with childish certainty. "He made pretty rooms and a swing and places for birds." "I think you're right," Sarah agreed, glancing around at the carefully maintained property. Despite years of limited use, the cabin showed signs of thoughtful design and care. Someone had loved this place deeply. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention. Sarah tensed momentarily, still hypervigilant after the trauma of the flood, but when a familiar black truck appeared on the gravel driveway, relief washed over her. The children spotted it too. "Mr. Harmon's back!" Mia exclaimed, dashing toward the driveway with Emma close behind. Even Liam abandoned his exploration of the shed to greet their unexpected benefactor. Sarah followed more slowly, watching as Dex emerged from his truck, looking tired but somehow lighter than when she'd last seen him. He was immediately surrounded by the children, with Mia tugging at his jacket and Emma talking rapidly about her discovery of the beehive boxes. To Sarah's surprise, Dex didn't seem overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. Instead, he listened patiently, answering Mia's questions and nodding at Emma's bee conservation plans. When Liam asked about the fishing equipment, Dex actually smiled, a brief, small gesture that nevertheless transformed his usually stern features. "My grandfather taught me to fish in that pond," he told Liam. "Bass, mostly, some catfish. The rods are old but serviceable. You're welcome to use them." As Sarah approached, Dex met her gaze over the children's heads. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the unusual situation they found themselves in. "I didn't expect you back so soon," Sarah said by way of greeting. "Coffee?" "Please," Dex replied, extricating himself gently from the children's attention. "It's been a long night." Inside the cabin, while the children returned to their explorations, Sarah poured Dex a cup of coffee and set it before him at the kitchen table. "Did you find him?" she asked quietly. "Mercer?" Dex nodded, wrapping his hands around the mug. "He's staying at his sister's bookstore, using the back room as living quarters, it seems." "And?" Sarah prompted when he didn't continue. Dex's brow furrowed. "And I didn't bring him in." The admission hung between them. Sarah studied Dex's face, noting the conflict evident in his expression. "That's not like you," she observed without judgment. "No," Dex agreed, "it's not." He took a sip of coffee, organizing his thoughts. His sister has built something there, a legitimate business, a life. She's his only family. Taking him in would destroy that too. Sarah sat across from him, sensing there was more to the story. "Is that the only reason?" Dex met her gaze directly. I looked into his case more deeply. The armed robbery charge. It's not as straightforward as the file suggested. He wasn't the one with the weapon. He was the getaway driver for a friend who pulled the gun. Fair judgment, absolutely, but not the violent offender he's painted as. And you're reconsidering because of what you said about your husband believing in second chances, Dex admitted. It made me look harder at the situation. Mercer served in Afghanistan, came back with PTSD that went untreated, made a series of bad decisions, culminating in that robbery. But since jumping bail, he's been helping his sister build her business. No further criminal activity that I can find. Sarah absorbed this information, impressed by Dex's thoroughness and his willingness to see beyond the black and white parameters of his assignment. "What will you do?" she asked. Dex ran a hand through his short hair, a gesture of rare uncertainty. "I'm not sure yet. I've got calls into some contacts, seeing if there's a way to negotiate his surrender under more favorable terms. Maybe get the charges reduced in exchange for his voluntary return." "That's more involvement than your job typically requires," Sarah observed. "Yeah," Dex agreed with a wry smile. "My bail bondsman won't be thrilled about the delay, but something about this case—" He trailed off, then admitted, "Something about meeting you and your kids has me thinking differently." The candid acknowledgement warmed Sarah. Before she could respond, Mia burst into the kitchen. Mum, there's a turtle by the pond, a real one. Can we feed it? What do turtles eat?" Sarah smiled apologetically at Dex. The exciting life of a 6-year-old. Everything is an emergency. "Lettuce," Dex said to Mia. "Turtles like lettuce and small pieces of fruit. My grandfather used to feed the ones that lived in the pond." Mia's eyes widened. "You know about turtles, too? Are you smart about everything?" Dex chuckled, the sound rusty as if long unused. "Definitely not. But I spent summers here as a kid. Learned a lot from my grandfather." "Will you show me how to feed the turtle?" Mia asked, her expression hopeful. Dex glanced at Sarah, silently seeking permission. When she nodded, he rose from the table. "Let's see if we can find that old turtle. He's probably ancient by now, if it's the same one." As they headed outside, Liam and Emma joined the expedition, eager to participate in the turtle-feeding adventure. Sarah watched from the porch as Dex led her children down the path to the pond, pointing out features of the property along the way. The sight was unexpected and oddly moving. The hardened bounty hunter surrounded by her children, making time for their curiosity despite his own pressing concerns. It revealed a side of Dex Harmon that few people likely ever saw, a gentleness beneath the tough exterior. Sarah's thoughts turned to Jack. Her late husband would have appreciated Dex's integrity, his willingness to question his assignment when the circumstances warranted it. Jack had always believed in looking deeper, in understanding the human stories behind every situation. As she watched her children gather around the pond's edge with Dex, listening intently to his instructions about how to approach the turtle without scaring it, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. In the midst of their devastating loss, unexpected blessings had emerged. This peaceful cabin, a temporary haven for her family, and the surprising kindness of a man who, by his own admission, had long ago stopped expecting kindness from the world. The path forward remained uncertain. There were still insurance claims to navigate, schools to enroll the children in, employment to secure. But for the first time since the flood, Sarah felt a sense of possibility rather than merely survival. When Mia's delighted laughter rang out across the pond as the turtle cautiously accepted a piece of lettuce from her hand, Sarah found herself smiling genuinely. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was leading them somewhere they needed to go. Later that evening, after the children had finally exhausted themselves exploring the property and gone to bed, Sarah and Dex sat on the porch, the comfortable silence broken only by the chorus of frogs and crickets from the nearby pond. "They've never had this kind of freedom," Sarah remarked, sipping tea from a chipped mug that had likely belonged to Dex's grandfather. In Riverdale, our property was smaller, closer to neighbors. Here, they can just be. Dex nodded, understanding. That's what I loved about visiting as a kid, the space to breathe. My father's apartment in Nashville was cramped, oppressive. Coming here was like entering another world. Your father didn't live here with your grandfather, Sarah asked, realizing how little she knew about the man who had so generously offered them shelter. No, Dex replied, his tone neutral but with an undercurrent of old pain. After my mother died, my father couldn't handle the grief. Started drinking, lost his job. We lived in the city where he could find work when he was sober enough to hold it. I came here during the worst periods, when my grandfather would intervene. The personal revelation, offered voluntarily, touched Sarah deeply. Dex Harmon was not a man who shared his history easily, she suspected. Your grandfather sounds like a good man, she said gently. The best I've known, Dex agreed. Former Park, a ranger, taught me everything about survival, tracking, understanding the natural world. Skills that serve me well in my current profession, though I doubt he'd approve of how I've applied them. I'm not so sure, Sarah countered. You bring people to face their responsibilities. There's honor in that, even if the methods are sometimes unconventional. Dex raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his expression. That's a charitable view of bounty hunting. Maybe, Sarah conceded. Or maybe it's just that I've seen enough of you now to know there's more to you than your profession suggests. The observation hung between them, honest and unvarnished. Dex looked away, unaccustomed to being seen so clearly. Your husband, he said after a moment, changing the subject. Jack, what was he like? The question was unexpected but not unwelcome. Sarah rarely had opportunities to speak about Jack with someone who hadn't known him. Kind, she said immediately, genuinely kind, without expecting anything in return. Funny, he could always make the kids laugh, even on the worst days. Stubborn when he believed in something. She smiled at a memory. We met in college. I was pre-law, determined to change the world through legislation. He was studying agricultural science, convinced that feeding people was more important than arguing over policies. Smart man, Dex commented. He was, Sarah agreed. When we moved to Riverdale and bought the farm, I thought he was crazy. What did either of us know about farming? But he studied, worked with local farmers, learned everything he could. By our third year, the farm was actually turning a profit. And after he died, you kept it going, Sarah nodded. Had to. It was our livelihood, our home. I learned enough from watching him to maintain things, though expansion plans were put on hold. The insurance money covered the mortgage, but not much else. We were getting by, though, until the flood. The mention of their recent tragedy sobered the conversation. Dex studied Sarah's profile in the fading light, impressed again by her resilience. No, he said carefully. There's no rush for you to leave here. The cabin's been empty for years. It's good to have it used, cared for. Sarah turned to face him directly. Dex, we can't impose indefinitely. You've already been more than generous. It's not an imposition, he insisted. I'm rarely here anyway. My work keeps me on the road most of the time. And the property needs a family, not a solitary visitor, who stops by a few times a year. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Still, Sarah shook her head. We need to rebuild our own lives, find our own place. The children need stability, a permanent home. I understand, Dex acknowledged. But the offer stands. Stay as long as you need to get back on your feet. As they lapsed into silence again, each lost in their own thoughts, the distance between them seemed both vast and negligible. Two people from entirely different worlds, connected by circumstance, yet finding unexpected common ground. In the quiet, Of the Tennessee night, surrounded by the whispers of a forest, waking to its nocturnal rhythm, something new was taking root. A friendship, perhaps, or something neither of them was quite ready to name. Whatever it was, it had already begun to change them both in ways only time would reveal. 2 weeks passed quickly at the cabin. Spring had fully arrived in Tennessee, bringing with it an explosion of wildflowers and fresh green leaves. The Mitchell children explored every inch of the property, gradually establishing their own special places. Emma by the pond, sketching the wildlife, Liam in the shed, tinkering with tools, and Mia on the porch swing with her books and stuffed animals. Sarah had settled into a routine as well, rising early to enjoy the quiet before her children awoke, tackling the endless paperwork associated with their insurance claims, and searching online for employment opportunities in the area. The rural location presented challenges for job hunting, but the peace it offered her family made the longer commute worthwhile. Dex had been notably absent since his brief return from Chattanooga. He'd stayed only one night before departing again, mentioning vaguely that he had business to attend to regarding the Mercer case. His communication since then had been sporadic, brief text messages, checking that everything was functioning properly at the cabin, responding to Sarah's updates about minor repairs Liam had helped her complete. The distance wasn't surprising. To Sarah, Dex was clearly a solitary man, unaccustomed to close connections. What did surprise her was how often she found herself thinking about him, wondering where he was and what he was doing. The children asked about him daily, especially Mia, who had decided that Mr. Harmon was their guardian angel disguised as a bounty hunter. On this particular morning, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, reviewing her latest insurance correspondence, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Beth's name. "Hey, sis," Sarah answered, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder as she continued sorting papers. "How's cabin life treating you?" Beth asked cheerfully. "The kids still love their rural adventure?" "They're thriving," Sarah replied honestly. "It's like they needed this space to process everything that happened. Liam's been helping fix things around the property. He replaced some broken porch boards yesterday. Emma's filling sketchbooks with drawings of plants and animals. Even Mia seems less anxious. And their mysterious benefactor? Any more appearances from the brooding bounty hunter?" Sarah could hear the skepticism in her sister's voice. Beth had made her reservations about Dex clear from the beginning, concerned about a single mother and 3 children, accepting charity from a virtual stranger with a questionable profession. "He's been away on business," Sarah said neutrally, "but he checks in regularly to make sure we have everything we need." Beth hummed non-committally. "Well, I'm calling with some potentially good news. Remember Marcus Wilson from the University Alumni Office? He mentioned his brother-in-law manages the Franklin County Library, and they're looking for someone with your qualifications. It's about 30 minutes from where you are now." Sarah straightened, her interest piqued. Before the flood, she'd worked part-time at the Riverdale Public Library, using her background in information science while maintaining flexibility for her children's schedules. "That sounds promising," she admitted. "Did he share any details?" "Full-time position, benefits included. The previous librarian is retiring next month. If you're interested, I can pass along your contact information." "Yes, please do," Sarah said, hope rising in her chest. A stable job with benefits would be a significant step toward rebuilding their independence. After ending the call with Beth, Sarah stepped outside to check on her children. Emma and Mia were collecting wildflowers near the garden, while Liam was nowhere in sight, likely exploring the wooded area behind the property, where he'd discovered an old treehouse earlier in the week. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew Sarah's attention. A moment later, Dex's black truck appeared on the gravel driveway, moving slowly as if the driver was uncertain of his welcome. Sarah felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the sight. Mia spotted the truck and dropped her flowers, racing toward the driveway with Emma close behind. By the time Dex parked and stepped out, both girls were waiting expectantly, bombarding him with questions about where he'd been and what he'd been doing. Sarah approached more slowly, taking in Dex's appearance. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. But as he listened to Mia's animated account of the turtle they'd named Franklin, a genuine smile softened his features. "We thought you might not come back," Emma said bluntly, fixing Dex with her direct blue gaze. Dex glanced up, meeting Sarah's eyes over the girls' heads. "I had some complicated business to handle," he explained, "but I always planned to return." "Did you catch the bad guy?" Mia asked, peering up at him with wide eyes. A shadow crossed Dex's face. "It's a bit more complicated than that," he said carefully. "Sometimes situations aren't as simple as good guys and bad guys." Sarah recognized the evasion for what it was, a conversation better continued without young ears present. "Girls, why don't you go find Liam and tell him Mr. Harmon is back? I think he was checking the treehouse." Once the children had dashed off, Sarah turned to Dex. "You look exhausted. Coffee? Please." He nodded gratefully. "It's been a long couple of weeks." Inside the cabin, Sarah noticed Dex taking in the small changes they'd made to the space. Wildflowers in mason jars on the windowsills, children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, books and games neatly arranged on shelves that had previously held only dust. The cabin looked lived in now, cared for. "I hope you don't mind the additions," Sarah said as she prepared the coffee. "The kids wanted to make it feel more like home." "I don't mind," Dex assured her, sinking into a kitchen chair. "My grandfather would have approved. He always said, 'A house needs children's laughter to truly be alive.'" Sarah set a steaming mug before him and took the seat across the table. "So, Mercer, what happened?" Dex wrapped his hands around the mug, gathering his thoughts. "I negotiated a deal. It wasn't easy, and it required calling in favors I've accumulated over the years. But Dean Mercer turned himself in yesterday with the understanding that the charges would be reduced to accessory after the fact rather than armed robbery. He'll serve time, probably 18 months instead of the 5 to 10 years he was facing, but his sister can keep her business and he'll have a chance at a normal life afterward." Sarah absorbed this information, impressed by Dex's dedication to finding a more just resolution. "That's not exactly standard bounty hunter procedure, is it?" "No," Dex admitted with a wry smile. "My bail bondsman is furious about the reduced fee, and I've probably damaged some professional relationships, but it was the right thing to do." "Because of what Jack wrote about him?" Sarah asked curiously. Dex considered this. "Partly. Your husband's letter humanized Mercer for me, but it was more than that. Meeting you and your family, it made me question assumptions I've operated under for years. The world isn't as black and white as I've treated it." The admission clearly cost him something. Dex Harmon was not a man, accustomed to reconsidering his worldview or acknowledging when it shifted. "That takes courage," Sarah said quietly, "to change your perspective after so long." Dex looked uncomfortable with the praise. "How are things here? Any problems with the property?" Sarah accepted the change of subject. "Nothing major. The water heater was temperamental for a few days, but Liam and I followed a YouTube tutorial and fixed it. Oh, and I might have a job opportunity at the county library about 30 minutes from here." "That's good news," Dex said with genuine pleasure in his voice. "When would you start?" "If I get it," Sarah emphasized. "The interview is next week." Beth connected me with the manager. They were interrupted by the return of the children, with Liam leading the charge this time. The 12-year-old approached Dex with newfound confidence. "Mr. Harmon, I fixed the loose boards on the back porch," he reported seriously, "and I oiled the hinges on the shed door. They don't squeak anymore." "Good work," Dex replied, equally serious. Those hinges have been troublesome for years. Liam straightened at the praise. I found some fishing line in the shed too. I've been practicing casting at the pond, but I haven't caught anything yet. The technique takes time to master. Dex said, I could show you a few tricks my grandfather taught me, if you're interested. The boy's face lit up. Really? That would be awesome. Mr. Harmon just got back from a long trip, Sarah reminded her son. He probably needs rest before fishing. Lessons. But Dex shook his head. I've been driving for hours. Some fresh air and movement would do me good. To Liam, he added, Get the gear ready. I'll meet you at the pond in 15 minutes. As Liam raced off to prepare, Emma approached more cautiously. Mom said you help people who are in trouble, she said, studying Dex thoughtfully. Is that why you helped us? Because we were in trouble? The directness of the question caught Dex off guard. He glanced at Sarah, who watched with interest, curious herself about his answer. I helped you because your mum is very brave, Dex finally replied. And because sometimes people need a hand when life gets difficult. My grandfather taught me that. Emma considered this, then nodded as if satisfying her own internal assessment. I'm drawing a map of the property, she informed him, with all the plants and animals marked. Would you check it for accuracy when I'm done? I'd be honored, Dex said solemnly, earning a rare smile from the serious 10-year-old. Mia, not to be outdone, tugged at Dex's sleeve. Will you push me on the swing later? Mom doesn't push high enough. Mia, Sarah admonished gently, Mr. Harmon isn't here to entertain you. It's fine, Dex assured her, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Swing pushing is definitely on my agenda for today. As the children dispersed to their various activities, Sarah watched Dex with newfound appreciation. For a man who claimed to be uncomfortable around people, he handled her children with remarkable patience and genuine interest. You're good with them, she observed. Natural, even. Dex shrugged, embarrassed by the observation. They're good. Kids. Make it easy. No, Sarah contradicted gently. They're children who've experienced significant trauma and loss. The fact that they're comfortable with you, that they seek your approval and attention, that's not about them being good kids. That's about you making them feel safe and valued. The insight clearly unsettled Dex, who stood abruptly. I should get my bag from the truck, and Liam will be waiting for those fishing lessons. Sarah let him go, recognizing his need to retreat from emotional territory that felt too exposing. She understood the impulse well. After Jack's death, she'd developed her own defensive mechanisms against vulnerability. At the pond, Dex showed Liam how to properly thread the fishing line, attach different types of bait, and cast with precision, rather than power. The boy was an attentive student, absorbing each instruction with serious concentration. My dad used to take me fishing sometimes, Liam said suddenly, breaking a companionable silence as they waited for the fish to bite. Not a lot because he was busy with the farm, but sometimes, on Sundays. Dex glanced at the boy, noting the mixture of pride and sadness in his expression. He sounds like a good father. He was the best, Liam stated with absolute conviction. He taught me how to throw a baseball and change a tire and grow corn. He said a man should know how to feed his family and fix what's broken. Wise words, Dex agreed, struck by the similarities between Jack Mitchell's philosophy and his own grandfather's teachings. When he died, Liam continued, his voice dropping, Mom tried to do everything herself. She wouldn't let anyone help, not even Uncle Greg, who offered to pay for our school supplies. She said we didn't need charity. Dex absorbed this information, understanding better why Sarah seemed so determined to re-establish her independence despite their circumstances. That's why it's weird she let us stay here, Liam added thoughtfully. She must really trust you. The observation landed with unexpected weight. Trust was not something Dex encountered often in his line of work. Quite the opposite. He dealt primarily with people who had broken trust, who lived in the shadows of broken promises and violated agreements. Your mom is smart, Dex said carefully. She makes good decisions for your family. Liam nodded in agreement. Yeah, but she's sad a lot, even when she tries to hide it. I can tell. Before Dex could formulate a response to this vulnerable confidence, Liam's fishing rod bent sharply. You've got a bite, Dex exclaimed, grateful for the distraction. Remember, what I showed you. Don't jerk too hard, just maintain steady pressure. The next few minutes were filled with the excitement of Liam's first catch, a decent-sized bass that thrashed impressively before being carefully unhooked and released back into the pond. The boy's face shone with accomplishment, his earlier, somber mood replaced by jubilation. "Wait till I tell Emma and Mia," he exclaimed. "They didn't believe there were real fish in here." As they packed up the fishing gear, Dex found himself reflecting on Liam's words about his mother. Despite Sarah's remarkable resilience, the weight of her circumstances was clearly taking a toll, a reality her son was perceptive enough to recognize, even as she tried to shield her children from her own struggles. By evening, Dex had fulfilled his promises, fishing lessons with Liam, reviewing Emma's meticulous property map, and pushing Mia on the swing until Sarah insisted it was time for dinner. As the family gathered around the kitchen table, Dex found himself included in their routine, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The meal was simple: spaghetti with sauce from a jar, garlic bread, and a salad. But the conversation and laughter that accompanied it gave it a warmth Dex had rarely experienced. The children recounted their adventures of the past 2 weeks, each talking over the others in their eagerness to share their discoveries about the property. "We saw a deer and her baby," Mia informed him importantly. "They came right up to the garden fence. Emma said we shouldn't make noise or they'd run away." "Smart thinking," Dex nodded to Emma. "Deer are easily startled, but if you're still and quiet, they'll sometimes get curious enough to come closer." "I've been keeping a nature journal," Emma explained, her usual reserve softening slightly, "cataloging all the different species we've seen. There's so much more wildlife here than in Riverdale." Sarah watched the interaction with a mixture of pleasure and caution. The children were clearly forming attachments to Dex, and while his influence had been positive so far, the reality of their situation remained unchanged. This was temporary, a sanctuary during a crisis, not a permanent solution. Eventually, they would need to establish their own home again, independent of Dex's generosity. After dinner, as the children prepared for bed, Dex helped Sarah with the dishes, a domestic scene so ordinary yet so foreign to his usual existence that it created a strange dissonance within him. "You've been quiet," he observed as Sarah handed him a plate to dry. She sighed, keeping her voice low to avoid being overheard by the children. "I'm concerned about how attached the kids are getting to this place, to you." Dex absorbed the implied warning without offense. "It's understandable. They've lost their home, their sense of security. The cabin represents stability at a time when everything else is uncertain." "I know," Sarah acknowledged, "and I'm incredibly grateful for what you've done for us. But the reality is, we can't stay here indefinitely. The kids need to understand that this is temporary, a stepping stone while we rebuild." "I meant what I said before," Dex reminded her. "There's no timeline on your stay here. The property's sitting empty otherwise." Sarah set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him directly. "Dex, you've been more than generous, but accepting indefinite charity isn't the example I want to set for my children. Jack and I built our life through hard work and perseverance. I need to show them we can do that again, even without him." The determination in her voice was familiar to Dex now, the same quiet strength that had first caught his attention in the disaster shelter. It was one of the qualities he most admired about her. "I understand," he said simply. "And for what it's worth, they're lucky to have a mother who leads by example." Sarah's expression softened at the unexpected praise. "Thank you. For everything, not just the cabin, but for being so good with them. Especially Liam. He's at an age where he needs positive male influence. And since Jack died... She trailed off, emotion briefly overtaking her composure. Dex fought the unfamiliar urge to comfort her physically, to place a hand on her shoulder or offer an embrace. Instead, he finished drying the plate in his hands and set it carefully on the stack. "Your husband would be proud of the job you're doing," he said quietly. "They're remarkable kids. That doesn't happen by accident." The simple validation brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of vulnerability. "Sorry. It's just been a long time since anyone acknowledged how hard this has been." "You don't need to apologize," Dex assured her. "Not for being human." Their eyes met across the small kitchen, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding despite their vastly different life experiences. Both knew what it meant to carry burdens alone, to rebuild after loss, to find strength in unlikely places. The moment was interrupted by Mia's voice calling from the hallway. "Mum, I can't find Hoppy, and I can't sleep without him." Sarah smiled apologetically. "Duty calls. The eternal search for the stuffed rabbit continues." As she went to help her daughter, Dex remained in the kitchen, contemplating the unexpected turn his life had taken. 2 months ago, he would never have imagined spending an evening washing dishes in his grandfather's cabin, feeling more at peace than he had in years. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comfort had never been a priority in Dex's life. He had built his existence around mobility, detachment, and the freedom to pursue his targets without complications. Yet here he was, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple routines of family life, in being needed for more than his tracking skills or physical strength. Outside the kitchen window, darkness had settled over the property, the night alive with the sounds of crickets and distant owls. Somewhere in those woods, Dex knew, his grandfather's spirit lingered, not as a ghost, but in the legacy of care he had built into every aspect of the homestead. For the first time in years, Dex felt a connection to that legacy, a sense that perhaps he could honor it in ways he had never before considered. Summer arrived in a blaze of golden sunshine and afternoon thunderstorms. The Mitchell children had settled into a comfortable routine at the cabin, their initial trauma from the flood gradually healing through the stability of their new surroundings. Sarah had secured the position at the Franklin County Library, her competence and warm demeanor quickly making her a favorite among the patrons. Dex's presence had evolved from occasional visitor to regular fixture in their lives. Though his work still took him away for days at a time, he invariably returned to the cabin, often bearing small gifts for the children: a book on local wildlife for Emma, a handcrafted fishing lure for Liam, a colorful kite for Mia. With each visit, the awkwardness between him and Sarah diminished, replaced by an easy companionship neither had anticipated. On this particular evening, exactly 3 months since the devastating flood, Sarah stood on the porch watching Dex teach Liam how to change the oil in his truck. The boy listened with rapt attention, his hands dirty but his eyes bright with the satisfaction of learning a practical skill. "He idolizes him," Beth remarked, joining her sister at the railing. She had driven down from Nashville for a weekend visit, her first opportunity to see the cabin since the Mitchells had moved in. Sarah nodded, unable to deny the obvious bond that had formed. "Dex has been good for him, for all of them really." "And for you?" Beth asked gently, studying her sister's profile. Sarah glanced at her, then back at the scene before them. "He's been a friend when I needed you most." "Just a friend," Beth pressed, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Beth, don't start," Sarah warned, though without real heat. "It's complicated enough without adding that dimension." Before Beth could respond, Mia burst onto the porch, her face alight with excitement. "Mom!" Aunt Beth, we found monarch butterfly eggs on the milkweed. Emma says we can raise them and watch them transform. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, Sarah replied, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's flushed face. But remember what we discussed about taking creatures from their natural habitat. Emma says we'll only take a few, Mia assured her solemnly, and we'll release them back to the same spot when they're butterflies. As Mia dashed off to rejoin her sister in the garden, Beth turned to Sarah with raised eyebrows. They're flourishing here. All of them. It's remarkable after what you've all been through. Sarah couldn't disagree. The transformation in her children over the past months had been profound. Emma's withdrawn silence had given way to passionate curiosity about the natural world. Liam had discovered confidence through the practical skills Dex patiently taught him. Even Mia's nightmares about the flood had subsided, replaced by eager anticipation of each new day's adventures. We can't stay forever, though, Sarah said, voicing the thought that had increasingly occupied her mind. The insurance settlement finally came through last week. It's not enough to rebuild on our old property, but it would make a decent down payment on a small house closer to the library. Beth frowned. Why would you leave? The kids are happy, you have a job you enjoy, and Dex clearly wants you all here. That's exactly why we need to move on, Sarah explained. We can't build our new life on someone else's foundation, no matter how generous the offer. The children need to understand that we can stand on our own. From the driveway, Dex looked up as if sensing their discussion. His eyes met Sarah's briefly before he returned his attention to Liam and the truck's engine. But in that moment of connection, Sarah recognized a truth she had been avoiding. Her reluctance to leave stemmed not only from concern for her children's stability, but also from her own growing attachment to the man who had unexpectedly become integral to their lives. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed and Beth had retired to the guest room, Sarah found Dex sitting on the porch steps, gazing up at the star-filled sky. She settled beside him, the comfortable silence between them a testament to how far they had come since their first meeting in the chaos of the flood. Beth thinks we should stay, Sarah said finally, her voice quiet in the night air. Dex nodded, unsurprised. Smart woman, your sister, Sarah smiled faintly. She also thinks there's more than friendship between us. The directness of the statement hung between them. Dex turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. And what do you think? He asked, his voice low. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I think that when a person's life falls apart, it's dangerous to build it around someone else. I did that once with Jack. When he died, I had to discover who I was without him. It was the hardest thing I've ever done until the flood. You're afraid of being dependent, Dex observed, understanding immediately. Not just for myself, Sarah acknowledged. For the children, too. They've lost so much. Their attachment to you, to this place, it scares me. What happens if it doesn't last? If your work takes you away permanently, or you decide you want your solitary life back? Dex was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a certainty Sarah had rarely heard from him. 3 months ago, I would have told you that my life was exactly as I wanted it. Uncomplicated, mobile, free from emotional entanglements. He looked out over the darkened property, his profile strong against the night sky. I was wrong. He turned to face her directly. Meeting you and your children changed something fundamental for me, Sarah. This place has always been a refuge, but never a home, not until you all filled it with laughter and chaos and life. The confession hung between them, raw with honesty. Sarah felt tears gathering and blinked them away, unwilling to cloud this moment with emotion. I'm not asking you to depend on me, Dex continued carefully. God knows I'm still figuring out how to be present in ways that matter. But I'm asking you to consider that independence doesn't have to mean isolation. Maybe we've all found something here worth preserving. Sarah studied his face, seeing past the hardened exterior to the man beneath, a man who had risked his professional reputation to help a stranger connected to her husband, who had opened his home and gradually his heart to a family in need, who had discovered within himself a capacity for nurturing that decades of solitude had buried but not destroyed. "I've been offered a promotion at the library," she said, seemingly changing the subject. "Head of community outreach. It would mean permanent employment, better benefits for the kids." Dex nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I was going to use the insurance money to find our own place," Sarah admitted, "to prove we could rebuild without depending on charity." "And now?" Dex asked quietly. Sarah took a deep breath. "Now I'm wondering if there's a middle ground, a way for us to maintain our independence while also acknowledging what we've built here." She gestured toward the cabin. "This place has become more than a shelter for us. It's become part of our healing. And you—" She hesitated, then continued, with frank honesty, "You've become important to all of us, Dex, in ways I never expected." The confession cost her something, a surrender of the careful distance she had maintained since Jack's death, a recognition of vulnerability she had fought to overcome. Dex reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers, in a gesture both protective and seeking protection. "What if we consider this a partnership rather than charity? You and the kids continue living here, making it your home in every sense. I maintain my apartment in Nashville for work purposes, but treat this as my primary residence when I'm not." "On the road and the ownership?" Sarah asked practically. "We can work that out," Dex assured her. "Property law has provisions for shared ownership, tenancy arrangements. The details matter less than the intention behind them." Sarah considered his proposition, weighing her pride against the undeniable rightness of what had developed naturally. Over the past months, the children would need stability, knowing this is truly their home, not a temporary arrangement. "I can think of no better use for this property than providing that stability," Dex replied. "My grandfather built this place to last generations. It should be filled with family." The word family lingered between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to define explicitly, yet its power was undeniable, a recognition of the bonds that had formed, unexpected and unplanned, but no less genuine for their unconventional beginnings. "We would need clear boundaries," Sarah said, thinking aloud, "space for each of us to grow independently even as we share this place." Dex nodded, understanding her need for autonomy. "We take it one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations, beyond what feels right." As they sat together in the gentle summer night, the sounds of the forest a soothing backdrop to their conversation, Sarah felt something shift within her. Not the painful wrenching of further loss, but the subtle realignment of possibility opening before her. 3 months ago, she had stood on her porch and watched as floodwaters consumed the life she had painstakingly maintained after losing Jack. She had believed then that fate had dealt her a final, crushing blow, that there could be no recovery from such complete devastation. Now, sitting beside a man whose hardened heart had softened through his connection to her family, Sarah recognized the tide had turned. Out of loss had come unexpected gain, out of destruction a new foundation. "One day at a time," she agreed softly, squeezing Dex's hand. "Starting with today." Above them, stars punctuated the velvet darkness, witnesses to the quiet commitment being made between two people who had found each other through extraordinary circumstances. Neither could predict the path ahead with certainty, but both recognized the value of what they had discovered together. A second chance at belonging, at home, at family. For Dex Harmon, the bitter bounty hunter whose life had been transformed. by a widow and her 3 children, and for Sarah Mitchell, who had found strength to rebuild from complete loss. The future stretched before them, not as a finished road, but as a journey they had chosen to undertake together, one step at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.